May 2016, in the quiet town of Tumwater, Washington, a dark tragedy unfolded that would have the community searching for answers years after. A 19-year-old boy goes missing without a trace after his black Chrysler Sebring crashes into the middle of the interstate barrier. With his phone, wallet and clothes abandoned in the car, the teen's disappearance sparked an investigation fraught with dead ends and unanswered questions. Even with multiple eyewitness accounts and the sketches of the alleged perpetrators, the case remains unsolved. In the aftermath of the case, theories swirled and suspicions brewed. But what really happened to him? Suicide? Runaway? Or perhaps something a lot darker? This is the case of Logan Schiendelman. Hi, my name is Oricat and welcome to our channel. We deliver cases to you in the dramatisation format, so if that's something you enjoy, you'll be happy to know we upload once a week. As always, my aim is to give a voice to the victims and remember them as they were. So with that, let us begin. Logan Drew Schiendelman was born on the 27th of June, 1996 in Olympia, Washington. He was born to his Saudi Arabian father and his mixed-race mother, Hannah. He never had a proper relationship with his father due to the way that he had been conceived. At the time, Logan's father met Hannah Schiendelman on a business trip through the Pacific Northwest. He left the United States before Logan's birth. So left alone as a young mother with two children, Logan and Logan's half-sister Chloe, Hannah was beginning to feel that she hadn't done as much with her life as she wanted to, and she wanted to find a way to progress it forwards. She reasoned that this would be a good way of making her children's lives better in the long haul. Therefore, at the age of 23, Hannah decided that she was going to attend art school in Seattle. She couldn't have two children hanging about while she studied, so she wasted no time moving there. So due to this, and just for perspective, this was shortly after Logan was actually born, Logan and Chloe became legal dependents of their Caucasian grandmother, Ginny Gibo. She raised them in Tumwater, Washington, only an hour away from their mother. Now, Tumwater had a very kind of dense suburban feel. It was home to a lot of parks and cafes. The schools were highly rated, and on the whole, the area leaned towards being more conservative. And whilst they were living with their grandmother, both children were kind of in their own bubble, so to speak. So, for example, Logan had never met his African-American grandfather. So like with the absence of his father, that was two big aspects of Logan's culture and heritage missing. After Hannah finished art school, it's unknown why she didn't take the children back from Ginny, but it seemed like there was always an excuse as to why she couldn't. Regardless, she then moved back to Olympia, which was only 6 minutes away from her kids. So Logan grew up to be a very handsome and athletically inclined boy. He stood at around 5'11", with dark skin, black hair and brown eyes. He was described to be quiet and sensitive, as shown through some of the hobbies he liked, such as music and poetry. Yet there was also a side of him that was very witty and outgoing, which helped him establish himself as a very popular boy in high school. For all intents and purposes, he was a model student. He was intelligent, he got good grades, and most importantly, he was known to be a sports star in the school. He played a defensive back in football and really excelled at that position. You had to be very fast and agile for it after all. Logan did also have a peanut allergy. It was quite a serious one, and it made it so he had to carry around an EpiPen with him all the time. Not that this really bothered Logan, because he was known to have a pretty laid-back nature. After graduating high school in 2015, Logan attended Washington State University. Washington State University was located in Pullman and was around 5 hours from Logan's residence. Logan, 19 at this point, hadn't eased into college life as quickly as he had when he was in high school. Obviously, college worked a lot differently, and there was also a lot of pressure to get good grades. In particular, Logan did really enjoy the partying experience, especially with the new friends he made. So this meant his model grades did take the back seat. But once he returned from his first year, Logan decided that he wanted to drop out. The decision was sudden and his grandmother really wanted to know why. Because for all intents and purposes, her grandson, this really breezy and friendly boy, had set off for college so happy only to come back anxious and withdrawn. It was soon revealed that during one of the last parties Logan attended on the campus, he and his friends were talking to some other students, in particular a certain girl. And at this party she kept making jokes that made Logan feel really uncomfortable. The jokes were tasteless and painful, and it was probably one of the first times that Logan had actually felt quite disparate with his peers. And the worst thing of all, his friends, who had been his friends for this entire first year, were doing nothing in the face of these racist jokes. They didn't stand up for him, even though they knew how horribly it was making Logan feel. And this whole kind of night and experience just made Logan feel totally betrayed. So this was ultimately what led him to drop out of college, but as well as doing this, he also cut ties with all of his friends. By the time he got back home, he was isolated and lonely, but he didn't want to speak to anyone outside of his family. Back in his grandmother's home, Logan did partake in doing a series of jobs to do something of value. Plus his grandmother thought this would be good to get him out in the fresh air. So over the next few weeks, Logan worked various positions, such as at a local laundry place and also working on his great aunt's farm. Logan was really trying to keep himself busy to take his mind off of what the girl had said at college, but her words still really stuck with him. In fact, as Logan went over things in his mind more and more, this resulted in him going into an identity crisis. So this was a period in Logan's life that was filled with a lot of confusion and uncertainty over, effectively, his sense of self. It led him to question his values, his goals and beliefs, and the accumulation of all of this led to Logan feeling very depressed. It didn't help that Logan, considering his mixed heritage, didn't have a variety of role models to look up to. He didn't have his father to kind of introduce him into Saudi Arabian culture, and then, as I mentioned earlier, he wasn't in contact with the African American side of his family. So Logan had all these empty, rudderless feelings to deal with, and I think it would have helped him if he'd had a good black male role model in his life. It would certainly let him embrace his heritage to the fullest and work through the problems he was having at college. Likely all this inner turmoil was eventually what prompted Logan to actually reach out to his African American relatives. Though what was strange about this was that he never really told his grandmother about it. Now, it's not really certain the reasons for why he would conceal it from her, but either it was something he wasn't allowed to do, or something he didn't think she would approve of. During his prolonged stay at home, Ginny did begin to suspect that Logan may be smoking marijuana, but there was never any evidence to prove this. She also suggested that the drugs made him suffer from paranoia. So now, approaching the middle of May, Logan did begin to partake in some behaviours that were showing that he was willing to come out of his shell. Not that he had mentioned it to any of his family members, but he had been speaking to a girl on an online dating app. They had been getting on well enough, but they hadn't met in person yet. During this time, Logan's home life suddenly became a lot more stressful. His older half-sister Chloe allowed her boyfriend Jake to move in with his 2 kids. And it didn't take long for Logan and Jake to clash, and Logan kept saying to his family that Jake was just such a big problem. And then Logan and Jake would get into these massive, really heated arguments because Logan felt he was bullying him all the time. And it soon got to the point where Logan wasn't feeling safe in his own home anymore. So it is unclear whether this was what prompted him to send this last text message to the girl he was talking to online, but regardless, he did it anyway. And the events that unfolded after it would make the words all the more sinister. He sent her a simple text saying, "I hope to survive this week." When Thursday morning came around on the 19th of May 2016, everyone was awake in the residence at this point. It was a clear, dry day with a comfortable temperature of 18 degrees. Chloe had already gone to work whilst Logan and his grandmother were sitting downstairs eating breakfast. It was during this time that Ginny noticed when she looked over the table that Logan was partaking in this really strange, odd behaviour, which was so different to what she'd seen in him the last few weeks. For one, he wasn't looking unsure or withdrawn. He was sitting there looking nervous and jittery, tapping his leg and moving about as if he was anticipating something. So naturally, Ginny asked Logan what this was all about. Was he waiting for something? And Logan kind of looked at her with this determination and assurance that, as I said, she hadn't seen on him in a long while. He just kept telling her that he had had this great epiphany and that he was going to be taking a small trip over the weekend. Despite this abrupt declaration, Ginny was running late for work. She worked at the Washington State Department of Ecology. So instead of pushing more, like asking where he was going or what had brought this on, she decided to put it on the back burner. She thought he should hold off on his plans and that they could talk about it further when she wasn't in a rush and she had come back from work. As Ginny left for work, little did she know that this would be the last time she ever saw Logan again. That day he had been wearing a white shirt, a black windbreaker, jeans, and Nike tennis shoes. Now when Ginny got back home later, she was expecting Logan to still be there. She remembered what he had been like in the morning and wanted to explore it further. But when she saw no trace of Logan and also looked outside and saw that his car was gone, she was beginning to get really worried. Had he just left like that and not told her? So Ginny tracked his phone and was able to see where the latest phone ping was. The cell phone ping suggested that his car had been heading to Olympia, Washington. So Ginny just presumed that perhaps Logan was going on an impromptu trip to see his mother. So with her mind alleviated, Ginny went to bed, but when she woke up on the 20th, Logan's car still wasn't outside and neither Logan or his mother had got into contact with her. Ginny decided to take this up with the Thurston County Police Department. She went up there herself, but unfortunately the department was closed for the weekend. So unbelievably, the first time a missing persons report came through for Logan was on the Monday, almost 4 days after he had left his residence for this unknown trip. And then to top it all off, as Ginny was placing this report, she got a call on her phone saying that Logan's car had been found and it had been impounded. As the company told it, his black 1996 Chrysler Sebring convertible was found abandoned on Friday the 20th of May, the day Ginny originally wanted to file the missing persons report. They said that it had swerved and crashed into the centre median barrier. It was located in the southbound lane of Interstate 5 in Rochester, Washington. This was approximately 20 miles south of Logan's residence in Tumwater, around the areas of Maytown and Scatter Creek Rests. Inside his car, a litany of personal belongings and miscellaneous items were found. Personal items included his wallet, which contained his debit card and $25, his driver's license and his cell phone. And then other objects in the car were several newly brought bags of food, water bottles, a blanket, clothes, and some DVDs. So all this stuff did indicate that he was planning on taking a short trip, like he'd originally said. So once the police had received Ginny's report, and then been alerted to the fact that Logan's abandoned car had been impounded, it led the police to make a sudden unbelievable connection. Because at around 2 p.m. on the Thursday that Logan had actually gone missing, the police received 3 separate 911 calls, all stating they saw the same thing. That a vehicle had been swerving across 3 lanes of the interstate, with no visible driver, and then crashed headfirst into the centre median. A tow company were called the next day, after the abandoned car rolled back into traffic. So, back to the Monday, the 23rd of May 2016, when the police finally took note of Logan's disappearance, it didn't take long for the news to be spread around the area. And before the police even had to ask for leads, loads of different witnesses came forward saying what they saw. For example, earlier that morning, a woman had passed the crash site, though to her it had looked like the car was kind of more abandoned and parked rather than crashed and broken. And what she noticed near the car was a young man, resembling Logan's appearance, standing around with 2 unidentifiable males. She then said when she passed the crash site again in the evening, she saw the car was still there, but none of the 3 people she had seen were near it. Instead, the only thing to show that anyone had ever been there was that the hood was lifted. So when the police questioned her further, the woman did her best to try and describe what the 2 men who were with Logan looked like. She described one of them as being around 6 foot with a thin build and blonde hair. His hair was styled into a bowl cut, and he was wearing a tank top and jeans that looked way too tight for him. The other man, who she didn't get an as clear look at, was described to have shoulder-length blonde hair, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. Differently, another witness, a truck driver, who had actually seen the crash happening in real time, said that whilst it was still moving before it made impact, someone jumped out of the passenger side of the car. They then ran into the woods alongside the interstate. He described the person to be a Caucasian with brown or reddish hair. So from this, some hypothesised, had the man made a mistake and it was possibly Logan who had been jumping out of his car in fear? Was he scared of something? Regardless, the police didn't think so. Then the final and perhaps strangest sighting of them all was something that wasn't even related to the crash. Later that evening, someone had spotted a disorientated teenager walking around the area near to where Logan had crashed, and that this individual wasn't wearing any pants. So because this sighting in itself was so eerie and bizarre, the Thurston County detective at the time, Frank Frawley, came forward and stated that he and his department thought the disorientated teenager might be Logan. They took search dogs out to the area where the teenager was last seen, but they didn't find anything. And with this frustrating result, the police kind of had to accept that yes, it could have been Logan, or it could have been someone entirely different. While some of the police were putting together witness statements, there were others searching and investigating the crash site. They initiated extensive searches using cadaver and tracking dogs to pick up scents, and this went on for a total of 6 hours. Yet even this yielded no results. Over the next few days, Logan's uncle, Mike Ware, who was a retired Thurston County sheriff, organised and assisted search efforts for his nephew. The searches focused around the 2-mile radius, surrounding the interstate where Logan's car had originally been discovered, and then specifically the woods sat adjacent to the interstate. These searches were both done on foot and on aircraft, but still no traces of Logan, or anything to suggest where he might have gone, were found. After this lack of progress, the Schiendelman family subsequently hired a private investigator to look into the case further, but again, nothing came of this. The private investigator just said that there was little evidence available to him that could help him pursue any further leads. For example, because Logan's vehicle had been impounded before it could be processed by a crime lab, any potential evidence inside the vehicle was officially rendered unusable. Though from what the police could make out from inspecting the car, and then again where the car had crashed, they said there was no sign of a struggle taking place. The next plan of action from the police's point of view was to establish Logan's motivations for leaving in the first place, and they wanted to see where the car had been intending to go before it crashed. Like Ginny, they presumed that the car had been heading to Olympia, where Logan's mother lived. Yet when they looked through all the phone records, it painted an entirely different picture to the one they originally expected. The phone record suggested that Logan had been originally travelling up Interstate 5, heading south, which was in line with going to Olympia, but then abruptly at some point, he turned around and headed north, ending up all the way in Vancouver, Washington. Once he got there, he abruptly turned around yet again and continued going back south until he eventually crashed. From the timings, it can be worked out that Logan roughly started his journey at about 11 a.m-ish, if we base it on when the original 911 calls came in at about 2 p.m. Travelling towards Olympia took him about 5 minutes, but then to travel back down to Vancouver took him almost 2 hours, and then the trip back till roughly where his car crashed was a further hour and a half. So in total, Logan had travelled over 200 miles. After finding this out, the police did further investigation into Logan's mental state before he disappeared, and also what his home life had been like at the time. And they soon discovered that Logan had been suffering with depression, as well as battling through strained family dynamics. You see, one of the first individuals they brought in for questioning was Chloe's boyfriend Jake. They wanted to ask him some questions and then consequently make him take a polygraph test due to his prior criminal history. Jake passed the polygraph test, so he was ruled out. But the reasons the police had gone down this line of thought was because of the tensions between Logan and Jake before Logan's disappearance. I mean, things had got so bad between the two males that Logan had repeatedly told his family that he wanted Jake at the house. With no further concrete leads for the police to follow, Logan's case unfortunately went cold. So different tactics had to be implemented to keep it alive. His case was publicised through many internet campaigns and fundraising efforts from Logan's family. A Facebook page was even established, which had grown to about 6,500 members by June 2016, only a month after Logan had gone missing. Local volunteers in the area even helped out by raising $10,000, which would be put towards the reward fund for someone coming forward and bringing information about Logan's disappearance. They did this by selling bracelets that had Logan's name on it at Tumwater High School. And then the reward fund was also helped along by this large kind of garage sale that took place in Olympia in August 2016. By 2017, the police had finally procured sketches of the men that had been described to be near Logan's car at the time it had crashed and he had disappeared. In an effort to keep Logan's case in people's minds, his disappearance was featured on the documentary series Disappeared and the podcast Missing in America. Now, as always in my cold case videos, there are plenty of theories for us to get into and discuss. The first theory is that Logan's disappearance had something to do with Jake. He did have prior convictions after all, and there are a few points to suggest this, such as Jake's erratic and aggressive relationship with Logan. Although, to be fair to Jake, to be the person who was the last one to argue with the victim before they had then randomly gone missing would put you in the firing line, whether you actually had anything to do with it or not.
Would be the tension and the hostility that's going on with his sister and her boyfriend. He was very upset about the boyfriend living in the home. We know that at some point there were fights, physical fights.
I asked him if he was responsible for the disappearance of Logan, and I asked him if he knew who was responsible for the disappearance of Logan. And he answered no to both questions, and my opinion was on it that he was not showing any deception when I asked those questions.
There's the possibility that he could pass a polygraph somehow without being truthful.
But then there is also the text message of Logan's in which he said he hopes to survive the week, though it is unsure whether this was referencing his relationship with Jake. But we do also have to consider Mike Ware's opinion. Different to Ginny, Mike, till this day, believes that Jake had something to do with Logan's disappearance. Much different to how Ginny denies that there was ever a problem between Logan and Jake in the first place. So really, it's whether or not you can trust Mike's hunch, considering he was a retired sheriff after all. The second theory is perhaps that Logan had a manic episode. He was going through a lot of stress at the time of his disappearance, including an identity crisis and suffering through depression. This could also be backed up if we take Ginny's claims into consideration, which was that Logan was smoking marijuana, because the drug can technically cause short-term paranoia. This would also be more valid if we were to look deeper into the witness accounts, especially the ones that quote that someone jumped out of the moving vehicle in a panic. Because from a distance, considering Logan was mixed race, there is a chance that he could have been misidentified as being white. Not to mention, when someone has particularly black hair or dark brown hair, when the sunlight kind of hits them, sometimes it can have a reddish type shade. So if the person who jumped out of the car was hypothetically Logan, and that he'd run into the woods rather erratically, then could this suggest he wasn't mentally competent at the time he disappeared? As a young adult, he was in the prime age bracket to start developing some mental illness conditions, especially ones that are caused by stress. I mean, he'd cut off ties with all his friends, he'd undergone racism at college, and then there were all the tensions within the family home. For example, typically the onset age for schizophrenia in males is between late teens to young 20s. But to me, there are some things that contradict him having a manic episode. More so because when he left his grandmother that day, he was nervous, but he wasn't having any dramatic mood swings or like acting really differently rather than just this consistent anticipation. And his particular wording, saying he had an epiphany, sounds like clear thinking to me. In fairness, that phrasing actually lends itself more towards suicide than him having any type of mental break. Not to mention, if he did run off because he was having paranoid delusions, schizophrenia, or maybe he was even in psychosis, then why was there no trace of him anywhere? Why wasn't he found? Because even if he fell somewhere, or hit his head, or got lost, it was just no way cold enough to die from exposure that day. This leads me on to the third theory of suicide. Because, as we've said in the video, and what the police suggested, was that Logan was very depressed at the time he disappeared, and also feeling very isolated. He clearly didn't feel comfortable sharing things with his grandmother, and he had no friends to confide in. The way he left, with nerves and an epiphany, lends itself more to excitement and anticipation, rather than being fueled by paranoia. And for some people who are depressed and are planning to end their lives, sometimes the finalising of that plan can cause a really dramatic shift in their mood. In some cases, their moods progress and swing upwards to something remarkably happier, more so because they know they are finally going to leave their troubles behind. Now, the fourth theory is one that is often quite a common one in cold cases. Did the people around Logan know more than they were letting on? For example, Chloe suffered through a lot of personal problems in her own life, so she wasn't really someone Logan could rely on, especially considering that she was going out with Jake, someone Logan really didn't like. And then there were all the instances where Ginny hadn't really listened to Logan's concerns about living with Jake. And to be clear, this was a grown man who had 2 kids, picking fights with a teenager. So in my opinion, surely Logan's comfort and safety should come before everything else. That was his home, and Jacob moved in later. Then there are also the interviews after Logan's disappearance, in which it features his family members and friends. And in these interviews are a lot of conflicting statements. Notably, the way Ginny talked about the 2 different children. Her tone and vocabulary about them was kind of different. You know, it seemed like that she talked about Chloe in a much more favourable light than she did Logan. Also, in this interview, Ginny acknowledges that there may have been racial issues going on at college, though it was something that she hadn't wanted to address at the time. And this kind of lack of following things up, and this kind of detachment to really how Logan was feeling, was made even more evident when his strange conversation came out of the blue when he disappeared. She simply went to work and put it on the back burner. Then there is the conflicting statements between Logan's family members and then his old friends. Logan's friends said that he categorically wasn't into drugs, and that he would never do something like that. Only a short while after this statement, Ginny retracted her original claim and said that she thought Logan was potentially bipolar instead of being paranoid from marijuana. Now, the last theory is homicide, though this isn't something the police have particularly wanted to commit to, especially since the case is still open. But the question posed could be, if it was homicide, did it come from someone Logan knew, or could it have been a crime of opportunity? I mean, in some ways, the whole reason of his impromptu trip was proven to be innocuous and that he had been intending to go on it. So let's say, for example, if we focus back on Logan's identity crisis, at this point he had gotten in contact with his African American relatives, so he was talking to them on a regular basis. With the combination of that and his identity crisis, could this have led Logan to believing that he wanted to get in contact with his real father? This would be a big decision for Logan, and I feel like this would resemble the type of epiphany he was having. And since his original direction of travel was to head to Olympia where his mother lived, could it be natural to think that if he wanted to get in contact with someone, i.e. his dad, she would be the person to ask? And so what was it about this simple trip that made Logan change direction so drastically? And that wasn't just once, but twice. And you know, that prolonged driving for around 3 hours just didn't make sense. His mother was 5 minutes away, and everything that was found in his car would suggest that he was planning to stay over. And we have to bear in mind that even the police admit that when they look at the phone pings on the cellular device, it's not necessarily able to pick up everywhere the car stops. Some areas are just too rural. So there might have been some places that Logan's car stopped at that were unknown to his family and the police. I mean, the food and drinks in his car were newly brought after all. So potentially, could this have all stemmed from something like a car robbery? If we are to believe that there was 2 men standing with him when the car crashed, then these individuals had to have got into the car with him, because there was no other car parked up. Did they perhaps point a gun at Logan, which suggested why he would do the erratic driving, and then perhaps eventually swerved to wrestle back control and autonomy? This could all also work if Logan had picked up hitchhikers on an off chance. Or there even could have been a racial motivation to it all. You know, because, as I've said, Tumwater and the area kind of surrounding that place was known to be very rural and very conservative. It just wasn't known to be the best place for someone like Logan to live. But there is still so much mystery surrounding this case, and I think a lot of it largely comes from the eyewitness statements, because they're uncertain, they're all over the place, and it kind of mucks up the timings of when Logan originally crashed and perhaps where he was positioned at the time. So was Logan the one running away once he jumped out of the car? Or was he not? Was he even in the car at all? You know, perhaps something had happened to him and he wasn't even the one driving when it crashed. And then why were 2 possible Caucasian men standing around the crash site only to leave it later, you know, keeping the hood open? And what of the disorientated teenager who was missing his pants? Was it Logan? Was it not? Did he sustain a head injury from the crash, concussing him? Unfortunately, as of 2024, Logan's whereabouts still remain unknown. His room is unchanged after all this time, and his car is still left parked outside of his house. His step-grandfather, Bill Gibo, passed away in 2018. Logan's disappearance had affected him greatly, And then there was also Logan's 92-year-old grandmother, who in 2019 said that her biggest fear was not finding out what had actually happened to Logan before she died. To this day, Logan's family believe that foul play was involved with the disappearance, considering there were 2 Caucasian men at his car. But they have also said that after a certain passage of time, and if the $10,000 reward money goes unclaimed, then they do want to eventually put it into a scholarship for Logan's high school. If anyone has any further information about Logan, the number to call is 360-786-5500.
He's welcome to come back anytime without an explanation. And I think he knows that.
If you don't want to be here, that's fine, but get a hold of us. Let us know that you're okay.
And if you need to stay away in order to feel secure, I wish you well. And I send you off love.
Thank you for watching the video. Comment yes or no down below whether you believe Logan's disappearance was a tragic homicide.